This is Mackinac Island. Off in the distance is Round Island and the Round Island Lighthouse. Gorgeous Mackinac Island started to become a popular tourist destination back in the 1870s. The Round Island Lighthouse is located 7 miles northeast of the northernmost portion of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. The Round Island Light marks the southern side of the narrow half-mile passage between Round Island and Mackinac Island. This lighthouse in Lake Huron was very important because this channel is the most direct route for ships traveling between Lake Michigan and Lake Superior while passing through the Straits of Mackinac. Ferries pass by the light all summer long on their way to and from Mackinac Island. The lighthouse is 57 feet tall. The light was lit in 1895 and originally had a 4th order Fresnel lens. The first floor contained machinery for operation of the lighthouse and a foghorn. The 2nd and 3rd floors provided living quarters for the lighthouse keepers and their families. This lighthouse is the same design as the Two Harbors Light in Minnesota. This light was automated in 1924, but still had a caretaker until 1947. The original brick outhouse and oil house are still intact. The Round Island Lighthouse marks the finish line for the Chicago Yacht Club Race to Mackinac, which has been held since 1898. A storm in 1972 caused a corner of the lighthouse structure to collapse. Restoration work was conducted through the decades, including by the Round Island Lighthouse Preservation Society, the Great Lakes Lighthouse Keepers Association, and the Lake Huron Area Boy Scout Troop 323 of Freeland, Michigan. The lighthouse was shown in the 1980 movie Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve, which was mostly filmed on Mackinac Island. Off in the distance, you might be able to see the Mackinac Bridge. The Mackinac Bridge is the longest suspension bridge in the Western Hemisphere. Thanks to the continuing restoration efforts, the light was relit in 1996. The United States Forest Service now supervises the structure, the first time we've run across the Forest Service being involved with the lighthouse, as the island is part of Hiawatha National Forest. The Round Island Lighthouse is on Lake Huron. Lake Huron and Lake Michigan, which are on the same water level, experienced record-high water levels in 2020. To follow are the waves that year at Big Sable on Lake Michigan just north of Ludington. That is growing!
Wow, it is.
That is really growing now. Look, it's growing. It really is surprising that the Round Island Lighthouse, considering its vulnerable location, could handle those types of waves for so many years. It's amazing it survived. Because of the high water levels, the Round Island Lighthouse Preservation Society launched a fundraising campaign in 2020 to try to get a protective barrier placed around the lighthouse. An anonymous donor gave $250,000, which led to fast-track approval by state and federal officials so that 1,500 tons of protective rocks could be placed around the lighthouse. exhibit the Round Island Passage Light near Mackinac Island. In 1948, the United States Coast Guard completed construction of the Round Island Passage Light, which was built to mark the north side of the channel between Round Island and Mackinac Island. The construction project included the building of a control house at the southern tip of Mackinac Island. Power cables were run underwater to provide electricity to the light. The Round Island Passage Light was one of the last lights constructed on the Great Lakes. This lighthouse is 59 feet tall. A skeletal steel antenna, 47 feet tall, originally stood atop the tower, giving the lighthouse an overall height of 116 feet. Each side of the tower contains a 4-foot bronze Native American head, commemorating the fact that Mackinac Island was a sacred location and central meeting place for Native American tribes of the Great Lakes region. No longer considered necessary by the U.S. Coast Guard, the Round Island Passage Light was sold at auction in 2014 for $65,000 to an out-of-state family.
This lighthouse is also built on wooden cribs. If you can imagine, there's wooden cribs under that were brought out here. They're like 12 by 12 inch timbers, like a Lincoln log set, put in place, filled full of stone, sank there, and then usually the outer edges were filled with concrete.
This is a ferry owned by one of the ferry companies that brings people to and from Mackinac Island. French explorer Jean Nicolet likely became the first European to see Mackinac Island in 1634, while being guided in a birch bark canoe to Lake Michigan and Wisconsin by a group of Huron Indians. This is Fort Mackinac. It was completed by the British in 1781. It is a former American and British military outpost. The grounds have lots of different exhibits showing what life was like back in the 1700s and 1800s. The British built Fort Mackinac on the island's bluffs in 1782 during the American Revolutionary War in order to watch over the Straits of Mackinac between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. Even though the Revolutionary War ended in 1783, the British didn't give up Fort Mackinac, which was in an area then known as the Northwest Territory, until 1796. What I enjoyed most at Fort Mackinac was a full section of a building hidden underneath these trees that was for kids. Here, I was building a fort with a computer program. And here, I was building a fort with blocks. Dad said my cool fort might last all day. Dad was wrong. Here, I was practicing military drumming. And here, I was trying on 3 different eras of military uniforms, all at once. These are some cannons in a blockhouse. In the first battle of the War of 1812, the British recaptured Fort Mackinac and re-established their presence. The Americans were caught by surprise by the British, as the soldiers at the fort didn't know that the war had been declared. In 1814, the United States tried to retake Fort Mackinac, but were unsuccessful. In 1815, the Treaty of Ghent ended the War of 1812, and the United States reoccupied the fort. From 1815 to 1895, Fort Mackinac served as an outpost for the U.S. Army. The name of Mackinac Island in Odawa is Michilimackinac, meaning Big Turtle, based on the shape of the island. The British shortened the name to Mackinac. Mackinac Island has been a sacred and historically significant place for Anishinaabe people, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, for centuries, long before colonization began in the 1600s. The three tribes made up the Council of Three Fires, which held meetings on Mackinac Island. Ahead is the Grand Hotel, which opened in 1887. The person who built the Round Island Lighthouse, Frank Rounds, came to Mackinac Island to help build the Grand Hotel. The Michigan Central Railroad, Grand Rapids and Indiana Railroad, and the Detroit and Cleveland Steamship Navigation Company formed the Mackinac Island Company, and they built the hotel in just over 3 months. The Grand Hotel advertises itself as having the world's largest porch, with a great view and fun rocking chairs that I got the chance to sit in. Mackinac Island is revered for its history, retail shops, horse-drawn carriages, and Mackinac Island fudge. In 2022, Travel and Leisure magazine named Mackinac Island as the best island in the continental United States to visit. This is the Forge a Memory blacksmith shop. Make sure you call ahead and schedule a time slot before your visit. I got a chance to pound a railroad tie into a small knife. The owner, Chad Osborne, took second place on a season of the History Channel's Forged in Fire.
All right, thanks very much.
This is the Michigan governor's summer residence. Several U.S. presidents, including George H.W. Bush, Gerald Ford, and Harry Truman, have stayed in the home. Here we are, Arch Rock. This is Arch Rock. Arch Rock was created by high Lake Huron levels after the glacier started to recede 10,000 years ago. This is incredible considering that Arch Rock is nearly 150 feet above the current water level down below. Council of Three Fires Native Americans believed that Arch Rock is a sacred rock formation. This is Dwightwood Spring. It originates from within the bedrock of the island's limestone. Ahead is Fort Holmes. Fort Holmes is a wooden fort, a blockhouse, located at the highest point on Mackinac Island, about 320 feet above Lake Huron. The British, after their early surprise Mackinac Island victory in the War of 1812, attempted to protect Fort Mackinac by building this fort in 1814 on the highest point on the island, about a half-mile behind Fort Mackinac. The British originally named the fort Fort George. The fort was built to protect Fort Mackinac from an anticipated United States attack during the War of 1812. That unsuccessful attack by the U.S. did come in the summer of 1814 on the north side of the island, although Fort Holmes, with its portholes for musket and cannon fire, was not directly involved in the battle. After the War of 1812 ended in 1815 with the Treaty of Ghent, the British returned the island and the surrounding mainland to the United States. The United States reoccupied Fort Mackinac and renamed Fort George up here on the hill as Fort Holmes, after Major Andrew Hunter Holmes, who died in the 1814 Battle of Mackinac Island. The Black House includes interpretive panels inside, but it wasn't open at the time of our more recent visit. Backing up a bit and filling in the timeline of history, Jesuit French priest Claude Dublin founded a mission for Native Americans on Mackinac Island in 1670. Father Jacques Marquette, the treasured French priest and explorer of the western Great Lakes and Mississippi River, succeeded Dublin at the mission. Marquette moved the mission to nearby St. Ignace in 1671. Once the French had a presence in the area with the mission, the Straits of Mackinac became a very important fur trading location. The British took control of Mackinac Island in the 1760s from the French after the French and Indian War. Moving forward with the timeline, John Jacob Astor's American Fur Company was centered on Mackinac Island after the War of 1812 ended. By the 1850s, fishing began to replace the fur trade as the island's primary industry. Much of the federal land on Mackinac Island was designated as the United States' second national park, Mackinac Island Park, in 1875, 3 years after Yellowstone National Park was named as the first national park. After the federal government left Mackinac Island in 1895, it transferred all of the island's federal land, including Fort Mackinac, to the state of Michigan. This area was then designated as Michigan's first state park. Motor vehicles have not been allowed on the island since 1898, as there was concern that cars would startle the island's many horses. An 8-mile road follows the island's perimeter, which you can ride a bike around. This roadway, M185, is the United States' only state highway without motorized vehicles. This is Devil's Kitchen, and this is Friendship Altar.
And guess what?
What?
We did it.